The envelope was thin, and the handwriting on it was a young woman's, careful and a little tired, and Honorio Breskin had spent 40 years sorting the post of the Varanza house, and he knew at one glance that this letter was not meant for anyone living in it. He carried it across the parquet of the morning hall, past the long windows, into the small wood-paneled reading room at the back of the residence, and he set it down beside the brass lamp on the desk, where Dominic Varanza, head of the family, was reading the city paper at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. "Sir," Honorio said, "a personal letter addressed to your late father." Dominic looked up. He had been head of the family for 9 years, and in those 9 years the desk in this reading room had stayed exactly as his father had left it, the green blotter, the bronze inkstand, the small wooden box that held his father's personal correspondence. Letters for the late Don Aurelio Varanza still came, perhaps 3 or 4 a year, old colleagues who had not heard, distant cousins who had drifted out of touch, once or twice a stranger with a debt of gratitude long unpaid. Honorio brought them to Dominic without opening, because that was the family's old courtesy, and because Dominic had asked him to. Dominic turned the envelope in his hand. The return address was a city he had never been to. He took up the small ivory letter knife. Dominic read the letter twice. Then he set it on the green blotter and looked out the window a long moment, the way he looked at things he did not yet know what to do with. He said, without turning, "Honorio, sit down a moment, would you?" Honorio sat. In 40 years no one in this house had asked him to sit in the reading room. "Write it," Dominic said, "then tell me what you would do." The letter was 3 pages, written by hand on plain cream paper. It was signed Selva A. with a small address above the signature. The writer apologized first for writing without introduction. She was, she said, the daughter of a country schoolmaster who had died the spring before last. Going through her father's papers, she had found a small file marked books loaned to Don Aurelio Varanza, 1991 to 1996, and a list in her father's careful hand of 14 volumes. She did not expect anything. She knew it had been a long time, but the books had been her father's whole reading life, and she wondered if it were not an imposition whether they might still be in the Don's library, only to know they were well kept. She would not ask to have them returned. She signed off with 2 lines about how lightly her father had spoken of the Don in his last year, and how grateful she was for any answer at all. Honorio finished. He folded the pages back exactly as he had found them. "Sir," he said, "she does not know." "No," Dominic said. "She does not. Will you tell her?" Dominic did not answer at once. He stood and walked to the long shelf that ran the back wall of the reading room and laid his palm flat on the spines of a row of slim, dark volumes near the bottom. "These," he said, "all 14. He kept them just here. He used to sit at this desk in the evening and read them and tell my mother things he had underlined." He turned. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, his short dark hair graying lightly at the temples, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes very steady. "If I write back now and tell her my father has been dead 9 years, she will apologize and ask for nothing, and the letter will be the last one. I would prefer not to lose the letter." "Sir, I will answer her as the keeper of the books," Dominic said, "not as anyone else, not yet." Honorio nodded. He understood what he was being asked to keep. He laid the letter in the small wooden box where Aurelio Varanza's correspondence had rested for 9 years, closed the lid very gently, and went out. That evening Dominic wrote back. He sat at his father's desk under the brass lamp and used his father's old fountain pen, and he wrote 3 pages himself. He did not announce himself. He wrote simply that yes, all 14 volumes were still on the shelf where her father's friend had kept them. He wrote out the list in his own hand, in the order the books stood, and beside 2 of them he wrote a small word about what he remembered being told about them as a boy. He said that if she would care to write again, he would be glad to tell her more. He signed the letter only D. Honorio posted it the next morning. 11 days later her reply came. Honorio brought it to the reading room. Dominic was at the desk when the envelope was set down. He read it before he took off his coat. She thanked him. She wrote that the list was almost exactly her father's, except for 1 volume she had not known had ever left the house. She told him a small thing about her father, the way he kept his books in a row on the kitchen table because there had been no proper shelf in their cottage in his last years, and how he turned each spine to face the same way before he sat down to read. She asked about the marginal notes. Her father, she said, had a habit of underlining a word he loved with a single line and a small tick beneath it. She wondered if it were not too much whether the Don had had any such habit. She signed Selva. Dominic wrote back that night. He opened one of the 14 volumes. He read for an hour. Then he told her in his letter that her father's old friend had underlined a particular word, patience, wherever it appeared in every book of his library with a single line and 3 small dots beneath it. He had counted once as a boy. There were 261 such underlinings in this room alone. He did not know what it meant. He had asked and been told only that it was a word the old man wanted always to be reminded of. He signed D. That was the first letter Honorio noticed Dominic finishing with a small, unaccustomed pause before he folded it. The pause of a man writing something true he had not said in a long time. The letters went on, the 3rd in November, the 4th in early December. She wrote about the weather where she was, a small city she did not name in detail. She wrote about her room above a tea shop where she boiled water on a single ring and wrote her letters at a folding table by the window. She wrote about the long last year of her father's life, about the small kindnesses of his pupils who came to read to him when his eyes failed, about the way he would not let her sit up with him on the nights he was worst because, she said, he wanted her to keep her looking. She told him, in the 5th letter, that her father had once said that the Don was the only man he had ever met who could disagree with you without making you feel small. Dominic read that line 3 times, then he wrote back about his father. He wrote simply about a man whom he had loved without quite understanding, and whom he had begun to understand only after he was gone. He wrote about the way his father had brought him into this room when he was 8 and shown him the bottom shelf and said, "These are for borrowing, never refuse." He did not tell her that he had been head of the family for 9 years. He did not tell her his name. He signed D. Honorio sorted the post on Tuesdays and Fridays. In 40 years he had never handled letters quite like these. They did not flirt. They did not fish. Neither writer was performing. They wrote the way 2 people write who do not expect ever to meet, and who are therefore unafraid of being honest about small things. The boss came down to the reading room more often that winter than he had in 9 years. He read in the lamplight after supper. He opened the wooden box where her letters lived and reread them when there were no new ones. Honorio saw twice the slight movement at the corner of his mouth that in another man would have been a smile. The 8th letter in January contained a list. Selva had written out in her father's hand from his old notebook the 14 titles in the order he had loaned them, with the year and a single short note he had made about each. 2 of those notes Honorio saw when he gathered the letter to file repeated phrases from Aurelio Verranza's own marginal underlinings, almost word for word. The 2 old men had agreed about the books across 30 years of post. Dominic wrote back on a winter evening. He had taken, he said, the liberty of opening each of the 14 volumes and copying down what his father had written in the margin opposite each of her father's notes. He enclosed the copies on a separate folded sheet in his own hand. He apologized for the liberty. He signed D. The reply came back faster than any before it. Selva wrote that she had read his sheet by the window of her tea-shop room, very slowly with both hands flat on the table, and that she had cried not, she said sadly. She thanked him. She said it was the closest thing to hearing her father's voice she had had since the funeral. She wrote in the last paragraph that she did not know how to thank him for taking that hour with the books. It was the 9th letter, and it was the first one in which she had told him what an hour of his time had been worth. Honorio brought it in on a Friday. Dominic read it once, set it down, walked to the long shelf and pulled the first of the 14 volumes from its place. He opened it. He took up his pen. It took him 4 weeks. He worked an hour a night, never longer. In each of the 14 volumes, on the front flyleaf in his own careful hand, Dominic Verranza wrote a small inscription, a sentence, sometimes 2, recording what her father had written to his father about the book, and what his father had written in the margin in answer. He did not date the inscriptions. He did not sign them. He simply wrote them in, 14 small bridges between 2 old men, and closed each book and put it back in its place on the bottom shelf. The 11th letter went out in early March. In it Dominic wrote that the volumes were ready, and that he would be glad if she were willing for her to come and see them on a Saturday morning of her choosing to the small reading room where her father's books would have been read by his father. She should, he wrote, choose one to take home. It was hers, it had been her father's. He wrote out the address. He did not give the name on the brass plate by the door. He signed D. She wrote back 3 days later. She thanked him. She would come on the first Saturday of April in the morning if that was convenient. She signed Selva. Honorio prepared the reading room himself that Saturday. He set out 2 chairs by the window. He laid the 14 volumes in their order along the long table, spines up, just as the old Don had once laid them out for a guest. He set a small pot of tea on the side table with 2 cups and a plate with 2 pieces of dark bread. He did not light the lamps. The spring sun was already on the floor in long pale rectangles. At 11 minutes, the side bell rang. Honorio went down himself. He opened the side door. A young woman stood on the step in a plain dark coat and a green wool scarf, her dark hair tied back in a low bun, a few loose strands at her temples, her brown eyes very steady. She held a small bunch of dried lavender in one hand. She did not look at the brass plate by the door. She had not, Honorio could tell, recognized the family name. She said, "Good morning. I am here to see Mr. D. He is expecting me. My name is Selva." "Miss," Honorio said. "Yes, please come in. May I take your coat?" He brought her up the back stair, the long way, past the side hall and the small library and into the reading room. Dominic was at the desk. He stood up when she came in. He had been waiting at the desk a long time, Honorio could see that, but he had been waiting standing only since the bell rang, the way a courteous man receives a guest. She set the lavender on the corner of the desk. She put her bag down. She looked very slowly around the room at the long shelf, the brass lamp, the green blotter, the open wooden box of letters. She did not look frightened. She looked like a woman taking in the room she had been reading about for 4 months. Dominic spoke first. He did not move from behind the desk. His voice was low and steady and unhurried, the way a man speaks who has practiced what he is going to say. "Miss Atera," he said, "before anything else, I am Dominic Verranza. I should have told you in the first letter that my father died 9 years ago, and I should have told you in the second one that I am his son, and I should have told you in the third one that this house is mine. I did not tell you because I did not know how to tell you without losing the letters. I am telling you now because you have come to my door and you should have known what door it was before you stepped through it. If you would like to leave, Honorio will take you to taxi. The books are yours either way. He will pack the one you choose or all 14 and have them sent to you by tomorrow. You owe me nothing and you will not be asked for anything." He stopped. The room was very still. Selva did not move. She looked at him for a long moment, the way a person looks at a face she has been imagining for 4 months and now has to set against the real one. Then she looked at the open wooden box of letters on the desk, where she could see in his hand her own most recent envelope. She said plainly, "You are also the man who underlines what he loves." He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "I am," he said. "Then show me my father's books," she said. "Please, I would like to choose one." She walked to the long table. He came around from behind the desk and stood beside her, not close, not far. He turned the first volume toward her. He opened the flyleaf. She read what he had written there. She turned the page herself. She looked up at him once very steadily, and then she looked back down and she read what he had written into the next book and the next. Honorio went out and closed the door behind himself. He waited in the hall a long while, his hat in his hands, because he understood that nothing more was needed from him today and he did not wish to be far if it were. When an hour later the door opened and Selva came out, she was carrying one of the 14 volumes against her chest. Dominic was a step behind her. He saw her to the side door himself. He asked her if she would come back the next Saturday. She said she would. She said she would also write on Tuesday. She offered him her hand. He took it very lightly and let go. She walked down the path and did not look back. She did not need to. When the side door closed, Dominic stood for a moment in the hall with his hand still on the latch. Honorio, watching from the half-open door of the morning room, saw the boss's face, and saw what he had not seen on that face in 9 years. The small unguarded movement at the corner of the mouth, the easing in the shoulders, the look of a man who had just been called by his own name by someone who knew him only by his sentences, and had decided in full sunlight that the sentences were enough. Dominic Verranza, head of the family, the man rooms fell silent for, smiled. It was a small smile and brief, and it was for no one but himself, and Honorio Breskin, who had managed the post of this house for 40 years, closed the morning room door very quietly and left him to it.